Hello, hello, hello. I don't think anybody is here yet. Am I? Yes, I am broadcasting. Ah, Peter is here and Stephen. Awesome. And Bobby. Hey guys. Hardly seems like only yesterday that we were doing this. It's hilarious. I know. Uh, sorry, folks. I'm sitting in for Johnny tonight. He is at a doctor's appointment and I believe is still in the waiting room. So he is not going to be back in time to do the show. So I do apologize, but you've got this less attractive face to look at for the evening. So there we go. I'm really sorry about that. Johnny does send his apologies, and you know how he hates to miss a show. So sorry about that. Bobby says how the time flies. Yes, it most certainly does. And I'm just checking in with the Google Doc because we have Truckee, who is going to do that for me tonight. And I have it on my phone, but I also have it up on the computer as well. So, Will crikey, 10 people in here already. Wow. Epicurse Music is here. He says, hey, Johnny, hey, class. Yes, it's been a while since I've taught in a class, but I am actually a qualified, for those of you that don't know me, I am actually a qualified music teacher. I qualified 10 years ago and taught for 3 years and thoroughly enjoyed it, but I missed being in the studio and I missed being on the road. So I decided to quit and I went back to going on the road and being in the studio, and I love it. I've been in professional music since 1997, having had a couple of bands of my own, and being a session musician. I've been a session musician technically since 1994, because people basically started hiring me when I was a teenager and I was still at high school, and people just hired me to play on their records when I was like 17, 16, 17. And I've been pretty much playing in studios ever since, really, for money. So there you go. There you go, folks. Those of you that don't know me, that's a little bit about my background. Because I'm aware that some of you folks will be unfamiliar to me because you're mostly Johnny Gibe's audience. Although that said, I do the songwriting Wednesdays with Johnny. So and they are always great fun, and I really, really, really look forward to those every week and really enjoy doing them. They're great fun, especially when Johnny decides that he's going to totally hit me with a question that he thinks I'm not expecting. The fun thing is, folks, I have a pretty good idea. I have a pretty good idea what he's going to hit me with, even though he thinks I don't. But there we go. But don't tell him that, okay? That's just between you and me, okay? We'll keep it a secret. All right, so let's see. Who do we have here? John Anderson is here. He says, yeah, but you do a better job with your hair. I do nothing with my hair, John. It does this all by itself. I don't have to brush my hair in the morning. Bliss. Love it. It's been like this for about 10 years, though. So, so there you go. So Barrington Bennett is here. Good to see you, Barrington. And Bob Powell is here as well. He says, hi, Johnny. Thanks for filling in. I watch your shows as well. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I'm glad that there are a good number of you guys out there that watch my stuff as well. And somebody is trying to send me some messages, so I better check in and see what those are all about. Okay, right. That's cool. Skip is here. He says, "What are you doing on now?" What? Yeah, Skip. I'm sitting in for Johnny. He's at the doctor's. He's in the waiting room, waiting to have his leg looked at. It's still not doing so good. So he dragged himself off to very painfully dragged himself off to the doctor's today. So um, he said that he wouldn't be back in time from his appointment to do the show. So I said, "That's fine. I don't mind sitting in for you. It's cool." So we got nearly 20 people here. Just a couple more, and we will have 20 people in here. That's pretty good. I normally don't hit more than like 13 or 14, so that's good. Skip says, "A bat with a broken wing." Yeah, sort of, yeah. It's like a chicken without a drumstick, I guess. Riffman Rob is here. He says, "Made it here finally. Hello, all. Good to see you." And Fred Grover is here. He says, "Hey, everyone. Just got tuned in for a while. Might not make it through the whole show. Thanks to JL for sitting in." Thank you, Fred. And I have the mighty Trucky Kruger in the background somewhere. I don't even think I made him an admin because I don't know how to do that. But he is around, I think. Are you here, Trucky? I don't know. If you are, let me know. Either in the chat or on the Google Doc, because I've got both open. Let me know. Let me know what the story is with you. Trucky is here, and that's very good to see. Trucky is going to be moderating the chat tonight and making sure that I get the questions so that I don't miss them, which is a handy little service that he provides. He's very, very good at it. And I really appreciate him offering to do the same for me as he does for Johnny, and Fred does that for Johnny as well. And I'm usually there in the background going through the chat and making sure that anything that needs filtered out gets filtered out. That's kind of what I do. So I'm in the background doing that. And I also try and help Johnny answer some questions as well. So we're about 10 minutes in, and we got 23 people here. And I figure we should get started with the show. So tonight we are going to be looking at continuing Johnny's series that he's doing on the Studio One native plugins. So we're going to look at the compression options that are available in Studio One. So a good number of you will be familiar with it, with what options are available, but not everybody will be. So I figure it'd be worth us going over them and taking a look at them, seeing them in action, and seeing how they work, and the differences between the different compression options that are available for free within Studio One. Now, there are some other options for compression that Presonus do in a couple of channel strips that you get. You can purchase them from the Presonus shop. One is called the VT1. The other one is called the RC500, and they are modeled after actual excuse me, they're modeled after actual Presonus hardware channel strips, and they are very, very nice. I have both of those, and they are well worth your money if you can afford them. And they give you just another option. They give you other flavors that you might otherwise not have discovered. So we can get started with the demo in Studio One in just a second. But first, just a few things to just remind you, because not everybody is familiar with my live streams here, because a lot of you are familiar with Johnny and his how he does his streams. I don't have the technology to do that. I don't have the upload speed, as you can probably see, because this is probably freezing and pixelating all over the place. And maybe the audio is a little bit garbled as well, because I have very, 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 very tiny broadband upload speed. I can only do just about 1 meg per second upload, streaming upload to YouTube, whereas Johnny can do 30 or 40, I think. So you're not going to get any of the cool graphics. You're not going to get the crystal clear sound or the crystal clear picture, I'm afraid. So if that's going to be an issue for you, I do apologize. And hopefully you can still get something out of this anyway, even with a slightly lower tech live stream. But I do my best, and hopefully we can get over the technological issues with higher quality education. That's the way I like to call it. Not to say that Jonny does not provide high quality education, because he absolutely does. He is one of the absolute elite guys in the business. So, and I have learned a great deal from him about doing videos and that kind of stuff. I didn't do any before I met Jonny, so kind of like what I'm doing now is kind of primarily as a result of him. So there we go. And Bobby says he likes the VT1. Yes, I like it too. I do think the compressor is a little bit grabby though, a little bit aggressive. For my taste, for my liking, I probably wouldn't use it too much. There's probably only a few occasions where I would grab the VT1, where, you know, if there are other options, no other options available. All right, so let's get started, folks. I'm going to share my screen. But first, actually, could you just post if the audio is good in the chat? That would be helpful. And also if the picture is good. Again, that would be helpful. Just so that I can get a handle on what kind of quality we're dealing with. James Hall says, receiving you okay in North Minnesota. I think that's North Minnesota. Not N. Jared says, I'm having a hard time waiting for the Persona's holiday news. Trucky says, good here. Everyone appears to be saying good. Sounds good. Yes, you are good. Excellent. That's what I like to hear. All right. Audio is fine. Pick is a bit freezy. Yes, it will be a little bit. It will be a little bit freezy. Not a lot I can do about that, but so long as audio is good, we are good, because primarily these kind of demos that we're going to be doing here tonight are about this sound rather than everything else. Vocals are clear, a little slow on the video, but all's good. Yes, the video is going to be the big issue, folks. So if you can get over that a little bit, that helps. So Trucky says tonight's topic is the fat channel and the native compressor. Yes, that's exactly what we're about to look at right now. So I'm going to get that open, and I'm doing this through Google Hangouts, folks. So you're just gonna have to bear with me, I'm afraid. Okay, now you should be able in a minute to see my screen, and you should be able to see Studio One, hopefully. That's what I'm hoping for. Let's see. Yes, you can. Good. Awesome. Right. I'll quit messing about. Unfortunately, I've only got one screen because basically I never in a million years thought I'd ever be doing live streams. So I'm still kind of a little bit behind on what I need to have to get live streams going. So I'm going to actually switch over to my headphones, so bear with me. I forgot to put them on. Alrighty, check 1, 2. Make sure I can hear in my ears, which I can, and you guys can see the screen. You're not going to see me at all on the screen, which is good. You don't want to look at my ugly mug for too long. Now, I'm not going to be able to see the chat at this particular point, so I am going to try and get the Google Doc open and see if Trucky can keep me apprised of how this is going, which I don't know. I don't know how well that's going to work. Okay, let's take a look at the compression options that you've got available in Studio One. Now, my mixing methodology, just to kind of start you off, is I do a lot of my EQ and compression over here on my buses. And so this is where like 80, maybe 90% even of my mix is done over here. So you will find as you look across here to my individual channels there's not a whole lot going on. There's a little bit of EQ, a little bit of high-pass filtering going on these brass tracks, and a little bit EQ on the Rhodes and the piano, but pretty much nothing else going on until you get over here. And then you see the Studio One compressor, and I've also got a fat channel as well open on the soprano sax, which we will look at in just a minute. So the compressor, here it is. It's marvelously versatile, this compressor. It's awesome. It's extremely transparent. You don't get any coloring. You don't get any tonal qualities added to the sound. It basically does what it says on the tin. It compresses your sound. It compresses your signal. It turns it down when you tell it to turn it down, and it turns it back up when you tell it to turn it back up. That's all it does. It's gloriously simple from that point of view. So it's very quick to dial in, providing you know a little bit about attack and release and those kind of things. And we're going to talk about those. All right. So for those of you that are not familiar with compression in the slightest, basically a compressor is like having a little guy sat on your volume fader on your channel, your selected channel. So in this case, we've got it on the Vox bus. So my little guy is sitting right here on this fader, effectively. And all of these controls are telling that little guy when to turn the volume down and when to turn it back up, how fast to turn it down and how fast to turn it back up, and how smoothly to make those volume adjustments. Okay, that's essentially what compression does. I've just summed up my five episode compression series in 3 seconds. There you go. I do have 5 videos on compression on my channels, which you can peruse at your leisure if you wish to, but you'll get a brief summary right here. Okay, so over here, this is where we're going to start. The ratio. The ratio tells you basically this is where you're going to tell the little guy in the machine by how much you want to turn the volume down. And then underneath this, we have the threshold. And this is where you're going to tell your little guy when to turn the audio down by this ratio. The knee will come onto in a little bit because it's a little bit weird. But once you understand what it does, it's just perfectly, it's just another smart little aspect of volume control. But these are your 2 main big guys here, the ratio and the threshold. Threshold tells the compressor when to act on the audio, and the ratio tells the compressor by how much to act upon that audio. So in the case of 2 to 1, I mean, it involves a little bit of math. If your math is really good, you'll have no problem calculating ratios and working out where the threshold should go and all of that. You know, I am numerically challenged. I do not even have a basic grasp of numeracy. So I have to use the flappy bits on the side of my head. And so I kind of button mash a little bit with these guys until I think it's right, until it sounds right. So that's kind of how I work. But basically, a 2 to 1 ratio is basically if the audio goes over your threshold by 2 dB, the compressor will reduce that to 1. So it goes 2 to 1. If it goes 4, if you were to have a ratio of 4 to 1, if I was to turn this up to 4, not 4.2 because that would just be hideous math, but let's just say that's 4. So 4 to 1, basically for every 4 dB over the threshold, the compressor is going to reduce that to 1. So if you have 4 dB over the threshold, it will reduce it to 1. And the higher the ratio, the more the compressor is going to turn the volume down. Okay, so if I just return this back to 2 to 1, because that's generally where I like to keep it, because the music that I tend to work in, I don't need a lot of compression. I only need a little bit. And I keep it fairly controlled, fairly contained, and fairly transparent, generally speaking. Not always, but generally speaking. And then the threshold is just the point where this is going to happen. Okay, let's move across to this side of the screen here. The attack and the release. These tell the compressor how fast to turn that volume down and how fast to turn that volume back up to its original level. Okay? Generally speaking, I like to think of these, I don't really think of them in terms of attack and release. I think of them in terms of punch and sustain. The slower your attack, the more of the initial part of the transient of the actual sound is going to go through the compressor before compression actually gets to enacting on that sound. Okay? So the more you allow through, the more of that initial impact you're going to have or in your sound uncompressed. Okay? And then the release is how fast or how slowly the sound the sound is returned to its input level. Okay? So the longer this takes, the more kind of sustain you're going to get of the sound. Okay, so if it's in the case of a snare drum, you'd think you're not going to get much sustain out of a snare drum because you just hit the thing and it's gone. Well, yes, but there's also a certain amount of resonance of the shell of the drum and of the head and of the air surrounding the drum and of the room as well. So the longer that release is, the slower that compression returns to normal. Once you've enacted this guy over here, the makeup gain, then anything quiet is going to get anything that's been turned down. Ultimately, when you use the makeup gain, is going to turn everything up. So anything that is quiet is going to be made louder, and anything loud is going to be made quieter. So you're basically squashing the dynamic range. So you're taking that which is loud, turning that down, and using the makeup gain, you're effectively turning anything that is quiet up towards that loud, towards the top of that, towards that peak, effectively. Okay. So these guys really work in tandem. These four controls here: the threshold, the ratio, the attack, and the release. So if you have a fast release, then the compressor is basically just gonna grab the audio and let go almost immediately. In this case, 1 millisecond. So it's going to be fairly quick. In fact, my attack here is 5 milliseconds. So I'm letting quite a bit through before the compressor is actually enacting. The makeup gain basically makes up for any gain reduction, any compression that takes place. So for example, in the case of my vocals, I tend to aim to see about 3 dB of gain reduction. And so that means that 3 dB of my original signal is being turned down, lost, effectively. And so I want to make that up with the makeup gain. And that basically narrows my dynamic range, and then I can turn the whole thing up using the makeup gain. And that gives the vocal a bit more of an upfront, in-your-face kind of sound, as compared to when you bypass the compressor. So let's do a little example. I am going to get onto the knee, don't worry. Those of you that are wondering. In fact, I'm not really sure what people are thinking about, so I'm just going to go check. Let's just take a quick look. Epica says, question of the night for me, how do you know when to place a plugin in sends or inserts, and what's the choosing process? I'm going to come on to that in just a minute, okay? Because that is generally a great question. Right, let's go back to Studio One. That's a really good question. So I'm going to come back to that one, so don't strike that through, please, Truckee. Leave that, and I will get to it. All right, so let's have a little example. Let's move this over here, and let's pin it. And we're going to solo up our vocal. And we're going to bring the vocal in. You'll recognize this song, especially those of you that are members of learningtomix.com. you will recognize this song. And we will look at how the compressor is responding here, and I will play around with this and mess it up as well, so you can hear how you can get it wrong. Okay, let's have a listen.
Here I am, and I'm staring at my phone. Don't got no plan, I can't wait for when you're home. There'll be wine and sweet recline.
All right, so the compressor is not really doing a lot. In fact, I think it only peaks at 3 dB at just 1 point. But it is otherwise only grabbing the very peaks, and it's not doing a whole lot else. And for this kind of music, that's where I kind of like it. Although you can also put compressors in a kind of stacked way, so you have a compressor running into another compressor. That's a little bit more of an advanced technique called serial compression. Excuse me, I was about to burp, and I had to go and stop myself there. So yeah, 3 dB is kind of like the loudest peak there, and so that got turned down. Now, let's say we smash this a bit more. So let's turn this ratio up to, say, what the hell, 7 to 1? Why not? Let's see what happens with a ratio of 7 to 1, and see actually what this does to this vocal.
Here I am, and I'm staring at my phone.
Especially if I pull the threshold back a bit.
Don't got no plan, I can't wait for when you're home. There'll be wine and sweet recline.
All right, so excuse me. If I see here that my my biggest amount of gain reduction there was nearly 8 dB. So if I was to make that up here and turn this up to around about 8, that will do. Let's try that. So now we should have input here and output here more or less balanced. Let's have a look.
Here I am, and I'm staring at my phone. Don't got no plan, I can't wait for when you're home. There'll be wine and sweet recline.
Okay, that was a bit better balanced. But can you hear how the compressor was certainly clamping down on the audio quite a bit more heavily? Which, if we play this in the context of the music, we may or may not like this. Let's give it a try.
Here I am, and I'm staring at my phone. Don't got no plan, I can't wait for when you're home. There'll be wine and sweet recline. I close my eyes, see the sailors spend their pay.
So a few words are kind of getting a little bit lost there, unfortunately. So I'm not really sure that this is necessarily working out particularly. I think we're kind of compressing a little bit too much. Feel free to differ, guys. Feel free to have your own opinions. I'm absolutely cool with that. Let's just return that to 3. And let's play that in the context of the track.
Here I am, and I'm staring at my phone. Don't got no plan, I can't wait for when you're home. There'll be wine and sweet recline. I close my eyes, see the sailors spend their pay. My heart cries, but I could never walk away.
All right, so hopefully you got to see a little bit of the native compressor here in action. Now, I did say I'd get back to the knee and what that does. Okay, so to just recap a little bit, the ratio tells you, or rather tells your little guy in the machine, your compressor, how much to compress by. The threshold, you tell the compressor when to start turning the volume down. The attack is how fast to turn that volume down, and the release is how fast or slow to return the volume to normal. And the gain here makes up the difference. So it makes up for the compression that you gained here, which basically takes your entire signal. So essentially what happens is your entire signal gets, the dynamic range of that gets reduced, and then the entire signal gets turned up by the amount that you set in the gain here. So what does the knee do? Well, first of all, the reason why it's called a knee is because it kind of looks like one a little bit. And basically what the knee does, it's a little bit of a funny one, because the knee, when you have a soft knee, at the moment we have a hard knee. So basically, if you imagine this line here is your signal coming in, and that dot there is the threshold set over here, and then this is your ratio over here. Okay, can you see how the line is bent? It's not continuing on its original trajectory. If it were to continue, it would be up here somewhere, and this line is a little bit lower. Okay, so if I were to exaggerate this to say 11, now you can see a little bit more what goes on with the knee here. So basically, as soon as the audio crosses this threshold, the attack and release come into action and turn this down, and it turns it down quite hard. Okay, so this is basically a smooth control. If you want your compression to happen smoothly, so this is not talking about speed, this is not talking about how fast and how slow these things are done, this is about how smooth and how hard it's done. Okay, so with a hard knee, no compression is going to happen until the audio crosses this dot here. Okay, but if you have a soft knee, watch what happens to that line. See, it's getting gradually smoothed out, and now the curve is extremely gentle, like just a gentle slope. So basically what is happening here is when the audio approaches the threshold, it is starting to be compressed a little bit before the threshold, and then it continues to be compressed after the threshold. Okay, so these guys come into play a little bit before, making that transition between non-compression and compression a bit more smooth. This means that any compression that you do with a soft knee is going to be nice and smooth and hardly detected by your listener. They're not going to hear it happen real sudden. Okay? On the other hand, if we turn it all the way back, now no compressions happens until we cross this threshold, and the instant we cross the threshold, these guys spring into action and turn it down. And so this is what you would call a hard knee compressor, hard knee compression, and it's abrupt as opposed to smooth. So if I were on the development team for Studio One, I would rename all these guys. Not because I think I'm better than them, but because this is how I think. And some of you might think this way too, but some of you might not. So I would rename the ratio, I would just call this amount. Threshold, I would call this when. And I would call the attack punch and the release sustain. And I'd call this the normality button, the normality knob. And this, I would keep this as knee, just because it kind of looks like a knee. Okay? So that's how I think of compression. It may be a little bit unique. It may be a little bit distinctively me and my kind of sense of humor, but it might not be. Some of you might think this way too and think a little bit artistically. And if you do, then this is going to be great for you. Now, before we move on and look at the fat channel, which we will do very briefly, let's take a look at this sidechain thing at the bottom here. Now, the sidechain is very, very cool because you can set this up so that Studio One acts as a de-esser, but it doesn't just act as a de-esser. You can also use it to bypass low frequencies if you want to. For example, if you're doing any mix bus compression, again, I'll show you that in just a second. If you're doing mix bus compression, you may want the compressor not to respond to the bass notes and the kick drum, because if it does, then the compressor is going to reduce is going to act on the entire spectrum of your mix according to what it hears with the kick drum and the bass, if they are particularly prominent in your mix, and you will get a big pumping effect, which will affect everything. Now, your genre of music may well be a pleasing thing, but for this, no, it's not. So you would set the sidechain filter up so that the lows pass through it and don't get compressed. So I'm going to show you this in de-esser mode and also in low cut filter mode. All right, so let's close this. And let's open this compressor here, because this I'm using as a de-esser. And I'm using the de-esser S1 preset. And it's very cool because you set it up like you would a normal compressor, but because it's S's, you want to hit them pretty hard and you want to hit them pretty fast. And then you want the compressor to release pretty fast as well, because you want the S to be out of the way, but you don't want it to affect the rest of the rest of the audio too much. So basically, you set this up for internal sidechain filtering, and you set the low cut to around about 5 or 6K, wherever that sibilant area is in your audio, and then you set your high accordingly as well, so that basically the compressor is only listening to this range of audio here. It is not listening to the rest of my voice. It's just listening to this range here. And we can check that by clicking this little listen filter button here. And so if I start the audio at the beginning of the verse, listen to the sound here. If we solo up the vocal bus again. Now, if you're wearing headphones, you should be able to hear this pretty clear. You may need to turn your speakers up a little bit to hear this, because it's extremely quiet. You hear those S's spiking through every now and then? Okay, so basically what is happening here is I've got this set up so the compressor is only listening to this range, and when it hears something in this range, it's going to clamp down on it very, very hard. I've got a very low threshold and a very high ratio, so it's going to smack those S's down and then release fairly quickly. Okay? And that's how you set your compressor up for de-essing. Okay? I'm just going to go back and I'm going to check out the chat and the documents. Let's see. The Rocket says, does this EQ make my butt look fat? That's hilarious. And yes, Epicurus, I'm going to get to your question about sends and inserts. Fred asks, so is there a general setting for the numbers on the compressor to start out at, or is it just going by the ear and meters? Yes, you have to treat every piece of audio as unique. There are general guiding principles, but essentially you're going to have to listen to your audio, and you're going to have to see what the audio tells you to do. Primarily, that's how I do compression. I have certain things that I'll dial in to start with. Like I tend to start with a high threshold and a low ratio value. So I'll start with 2 to 1, and I'll start with the threshold really quite high, and I'm only looking for 2 or 3 dBs worth of compression. That's my general guiding principle with compression, and then I'll sort out the attack and release, because the attack and release are very, very cool little tools. Because what you can do with the attack and release is, if you have a slow attack on your audio, for example, your lead vocal, if you set your lead vocal up to have a slow attack, then a lot of that initial transient of each sound, of each syllable, is going to come through the compressor without being compressed so much, which means it's going to have a lot of impact, which means it's going to be a lot forward in your mix. But let's say you've got backing vocals as well. You don't want the backing vocals to be as much necessarily, generally speaking. I don't want my backing vocals to be in my face like the lead vocal. I want them to be sat back a little bit. So what I would do there is I would set a faster attack, which means the compressor is going to reduce that volume faster than it is on the lead vocal. And that gives the illusion to your ears that the backing vocals are sat further back from the lead vocal. And you can do this with every element of your mix. If you want your drums to sit back in the mix and not be smacking in your face, give them a fast attack and a slower release. If you want something to be forward and up front and in your face, do the opposite. Go for a slow attack and a faster release. And generally, I would say have your groupings of instruments or voices or sounds, whatever you're working with, to breathe together. So if you have guitars, electric guitars, you have, say, 7 electric guitars, use the same compression settings on each one of those so that the compressor works on them together as an ensemble. And then do the same for your horns, for your strings, for your backing vocals. Do those kind of things so that the compression is happening at the same time and the breathing is happening at the same time with each of those instrument groups. That would be my my general advice there. Let's see. Jared says, it really depends on the source, Fred. Like J.O. says, 3 dB is a good starting point for vocals and could be the difference on the vocal bus. Yes. Can you go over the release effect one more time? You just got the attack. Certainly, John, I can do that. Yep, let's go back to Studio One. And let's go back to this guy over here. And I'm going to set this back to 2. So, if the attack is giving me lots of punch, if it's a slow attack, if I were to crank this over to, say, 22 milliseconds, that means the compressor is going to take 22 milliseconds to reach full compression according to the ratio and the threshold. That means for those 22.9 milliseconds, that 22.9 milliseconds of audio of a particular sound, it might be a consonant, it might be a vowel, it could be anything if it's a vocal. Whatever that sound is, 22.9 milliseconds of that sound is not going to be hit nearly so hard with the compressor because the compressor is not yet at full compression until those 22.9 milliseconds have elapsed. Okay? This is the kind of the technical way of explaining it, which is why I call this punch, because that initial sound is being allowed to punch through. Okay? You said you got attack. That's cool. So release. Release is how quickly or how slowly the compression is going to be restored to its original input signal level. Okay? So once the compressor has got hold of your audio, be that very gently, very lightly, or very heavily, depending upon the ratio, the release is how fast or how slowly it is going to restore the volume back to its original input level. which is why it gives you the effect of sustain of the instrument or the sound or the voice, because of how it interacts with the makeup gain. Okay, so that's what the release does. It gives you sustain. So if you don't want any sustain, if you want the compressor to kind of like grab and let go almost instantly, then set it really fast. So this is only going to take 1 millisecond. With this setting here, it's going to take 1 millisecond for the compressor to release audio back to its original level. All right? That is the release in a nutshell. I hope that that actually helps there. Let's see. Bobby Booth has a whole bunch of helpful numbers there. Drums 2-to-1, bass 4-to-1, electric guitars 2-to-1 to 6-to-1, vocals are 2-to-1, acoustic guitars 4-to-1 for the ratio. Yeah, those are a good ballpark suggestions, Bobby. But again, it depends upon the genre of music that you're mixing, and it depends upon the actual recordings themselves as to whether you're going to follow that. For example, with drums, that might be your general drums compression for a pop song, 2-to-1. But you can also do parallel compression, which is kind of another more advanced technique where you can blend in a very heavily compressed signal with your regularly compressed signal and blend them together to get an even more upfront sound. And you can do that with vocals as much as you do that with drums. Jared says, set the release so it returns to 0 before the next transient to start with. Yes, that's exactly what the release does. Peter says, when writing vocals with the fader, should you put the compressor pre or post fader? Very good question. Well, inserts in Studio One are pre-fader as far as I know. So the only way to do post-fader compression is to set a separate effects channel up and do a post-fader send. Would that be right? Or have I got this the wrong way around? I might have this the wrong way around. Yeah, if you want to do pre-fader compression, you put the compressor on a separate effects channel and you do a pre-fader send. I think the sends default to post-fader. But when writing the vocals, that's a good question. I think my opinion would be that I would want to compress the signal first before I start writing the fader automation-wise. I don't know. I don't tend to do any vocal writing particularly, to be honest. It's just not really something I do very much. I may well kind of like have automation on the vocals so that it goes up a little bit, a couple of dBs in the chorus, and then drops down for the verses. But that tends to be about as much as I do. If I'm the vocalist, I tend to do what I call self-compression. So if I'm going to be quiet, I will get close up and personal with the microphone. But if I'm going to be loud, I will back off the microphone quite a bit. And for me, doing that means that I'm self-automating. And it means I get a much more even signal going into any compression. Epicurse Music says, I mean, wow, I just understood the compressor for the first time. Wonderful. I'm very glad to hear that. And Woodbeast says, that's a brilliant description. Thank you very much. Brilliant. How cool, says Beatrice. Fred says, I agree with Epicurse on the compressor. Need to watch again to understand the true purpose of the sidechain and how it works. Yes, sidechaining is, well, there's different ways of doing sidechaining. You can do sidechaining internally within that particular channel, which is what I was showing there, where you're using it as a de-esser, or if you're using it in mix bus mode. I haven't shown you that. I shall show you that right now, because I did say over here is my mix bus compressor. Now, what you can do is you can set these guys up to, if you hit the filter button here, and now it defaults to internal sidechain filter. And I could set that to off, which is what I tend to do in mix bus mode. And then I will set this guy so that it's allowing some of the lows to pass through, which means my compressor is not going to be hit by the kick drum all the time, which is kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So when I'm in mixed bus compression mode, as I am here, it says master bus there, my ratio is nice and light, 2:1, high threshold. So I'm basically only grabbing the treetops of my audio. And I have a pretty slow attack. So I'm allowing for the mix to be plenty punchy, but also I've got a fairly slow release as well, because I want there to be plenty of sustain as well. And generally speaking, you can find the release time by kind of like the propulsion of the music. So if it's of a fast tempo, if the music is of a fast tempo, then you maybe want to find a faster release setting so that the audio, the compressor releases before the next sound comes along. That would be generally a way to think about release in a general setting. But in terms of mixed bus compression, I have these set up at 30 milliseconds attack and 100 millisecond release, because I am told that the SSL E channel compressor, although it doesn't have specific attack and release knobs on it, it does default. It's designed with these settings. So basically it's fixed at 30 and 100. And I like the sound of SSL consoles. I was brought up on SSL consoles. I learned my craft on the SSL E channel, the SSL E console, I should say. And so that's why I adopt these particular settings. Not that the compressor is actually going to emulate an SSL, because it's not, because it's a transparent compressor. It doesn't have anything analog within it or any analog modeling within it. So I hope that helps a little bit. So I'm using this internal sidechain filter here on the master bus to make sure that the compressor is not listening to anything below 66 hertz. And that means the real beef of my kick drum is not going to set off the compressor. And, you know, some of the lower bass notes are not going to set off the compressor either. And it means that I end up with much better balanced compression on the mix bus, which essentially means when I'm doing mix bus compression, all I'm doing is just bringing everything together. I'm just bringing all the elements of the mix a little bit closer together, so that I get a nice, even sounding mix at the end. I put this on at the start of the mix, and I mix through this. So I tend to just kind of set this as it is. In my static mix phase, I'll dial in this guy. Once I've got all my levels and I've got everything panned out how I want, and I've got it sounding really good without any plugins at all, I'll get this guy on and I'll dial in this little bit. And I'm only looking for half a dB to 1.5 dB of gain reduction. Okay, that's mix bus. And I'm aware that we're running out of time here. I am prepared to go a little bit over folks tonight, because I know I'm sitting in for Jonny. So I'm prepared to do that. That is not a problem, because I don't want to miss any more questions. And I know you guys have probably got quite a lot. Fred says, I agree with Epicurus on the compressor. Need to watch again to understand the true purpose of sidechain. Okay, I hope that little bit on the sidechain there has helped you. Dietrich Dewberry JL said he doesn't need compression for his music. So what type is the compressor best used for? I do use compression. I just don't use it heavily, because acoustic music doesn't tend to require a lot of compression. I'm compressing to even out the performances. I'm compressing to even out and add maybe a little bit of color if I'm using some third-party plugins. Like if I'm using an LA28 or an 1176, I'm not looking to slam the audio hard. If I was mixing something that's a bit more rock orientated or heavy metal orientated or dance orientated, then yes, I might use a lot heavier compression. But for jazz, for folk music, you don't need. You just don't need a lot of compression. You will end up destroying your mix if you do. Whitby says, if someone sends tracks rendered with effects like reverb, will that affect your compressor settings? It probably will. Because you'll be compressing the reverb as well. And there's nothing you can do about that. So I would say handle with care and allow your ears to be your final assessor. Listen very, very carefully to the tail of the sound. So if it's a guitar with reverb or it's a vocal with reverb, pay careful attention to the tail of that reverb when you're setting your release on the compressor, so that you don't cut it off and you don't destroy that reverb. Because it more than likely that reverb will have printed to that track for a purpose. So maybe consult the recording engineer who did that and find out what their original intention was, and then kind of work with them a little bit, maybe, would be my advice. Epica says, could we use that de-esser to remove the hissing in my score, Jared? Yes, you could. You could. If you can find the frequency, you can do that. You can certainly do that. I would maybe recommend using something like a noise reduction plugin, if you can find one. Waves do one called the NS1, which I do have, which I use mostly on my voiceover tracks. But you certainly can use the sidechain effect in that way. Let's see. De-esser compress quite a lot. Yes, I certainly do. You don't have to. It depends on how bad the essing is. If it's really bad, if it's really sibilant, then yes, you probably want to do slam. You probably do want to slam on it. My S's are soft. I mean, this mic is kind of giving me away because the Rode NT1 has a little bit of a high frequency bump to it. But generally speaking, my singing voice, my speaking voice, I don't have a lot of S's. My S's are not big because I have a very slight lisp, which I've trained myself over the years out of, but it's still there. And it just means my S's are softer than most people's. So I don't tend to need to de-ess particularly heavy for me, but some people have very, very, very sibilant S's and T's. And yeah, you'll need to hit those guys hard. When would you use the auto setting? I don't use the auto setting at all. It's not because you can't or you shouldn't. I just don't. And there's a reason for that. Is because I like to do everything myself. I like to have everything set up myself rather than having Studio One try and decide when the makeup gain should be used and how much. In version 2 of Studio One, there was a bit of a bug with the compressor, which meant that when you engage this guy, it basically just turned everything up ridiculously. I'm not sure whether that's still present. We can explore that possibility. I think they got rid of it, but to be honest, once I discovered that there was this issue, I stopped using the auto gain feature. But the idea of the auto gain feature is that it should automatically balance your gain for you, your input and your output gain. But as I say, it didn't always used to. So let's try it. Let's stick this to auto and see what happens. In fact, did you see what happened to this line just then? Watch again. Watch closely to this line. When I click auto, the line drops actually from where I set it, which is interesting. Let's see what it does. Oh, hang on. Let's turn this guy off. Hang on. It's because I'm on the DS or what? Oh, that's going on here. Hang on just a second. Try and figure out why I'm not hearing anything. I've got this filter switched on there, that's why. Let's try that again.
Here I am.
That's better.
And I'm staring at my phone.
Let's turn this guy
Don't
on.
got no plan. I can't wait for when you're home.
Now, did you hear what happened just then? The f on 4. There was a lot of overloading of the mic going on there because I didn't really have a very good pop shield then when I recorded this.
Plan. I can't wait for when you're home.
See, look at that. It spiked to 4 dB of gain reduction. Without this guy, let's play it again.
Plan. I can't wait for when you're home.
Maybe it is just quite big, and I just hadn't noticed that before. Okay, fair enough. But yeah, this guy basically just balances your gain automatically for you. And as we can see here, that issue that was present in version 2 is no longer an issue. All right, let's have a look. I see you got centered with blue faders. Can you please explain the difference? I know it's not related. Yes, I can very quickly. These guys are regular post-fader sends, which means the audio is being sent after the fader, which means if I make any adjustment to these faders, it will affect the send going to the reverb or delay, whatever the case might be. If I wanted to do something like parallel compression, for example, on my drums over here, I'd create a new bus called parallel drums. I'd stick a compressor on there, and I would want to do a pre-fader send, so it would be orange. And what that would mean is that the audio would come through the channel like normal, but a copy would be sent to my my heavy compression bus before it hits this fader, which means I can adjust this to my heart's content, and it's not going to affect the parallel bus at all, which is how I want it to be, so that I can blend that parallel bus in naturally with this regular drum bus here. So that's what how I would use a pre-fader send. Some people do pre-fader sends on everything, so that they adjust their send amount, their kind of amounts of effects actually on the effects channels. They maybe have a few more effects channels than I do for this song. And if I had more reverbs and more delays, then I might do pre-fader sends to particular reverb and delays, so I can have those particular reverbs at a particular level in the song. I might do it that way. So I hope that helps. Let's see. Can you click the wee fader icon to turn it yellow? Then it's pre. Yes, that's quite correct. 3D mixing is one method I wish to learn. 3D mixing, front, back, sides. Yeah, front, back, left, and right. And you use compression to handle the front and back. So what you want forward, you would use a slow attack, faster release, and the opposite for anything you want further back in the mix, as well as your levels. That would be my opinion of 3D mixing. I agree on the mixing through the compressor. Yes, good, thank you. Do you have instrument of choice that you can practice with the compressor to hear all the different options? I would say try several, because you would maybe approach compression differently with a different source material. And you may even, as you get further down the line, decide you may want to use a different compressor for a particular piece of audio. All right, so it might be that for electric guitars, you might prefer to use an LA2A, but for drums, you might prefer an 1176, for example. That's a little bit further down the line, but if you're just starting out, I would say just use the regular compressor and try things out on different source materials and see how it works and see what you like. I'm coming to the end, folks. We've only run over by a few minutes. Let's see. I didn't get to the fat channel, did I? That's a shame. I will do the fat channel on Sunday. On my Sunday show, we will look at the fat channel. We'll just have to make sure that Johnny doesn't look at it for the rest of the week. I'm sure we can schedule that. So I will look at the fat channel in great, glorious detail on my show on Sunday. So if you are interested in that, make sure you book that time in. It will be at the normal time of 6 p.m. Central. and we will look at the fat channel then. So I do apologize if you are up for wanting to see the fat channel. Then we will do that, I promise. Okay, informative, thank you. Did you explain how to decide where a plugin goes and the inserts will send? No, let's do that now. Inserts and sends. Here we go. If I'm sending a basically a copy of my signal to something else. So if I've got a delay on my vocal, like I have here, I've got a delay send set up here. My vocal channel is going as follows. Follow the chain. It's going through this channel with nothing on it. That is then going to my vocal bus. So it is then being EQ'd and compressed and de-essed, and then a copy is going after the fader to my delay, and there it's going through my beat delay, and it's going through this EQ as well to roll off some of the low end of the delay. And that's how I would use send, generally speaking. So sends I use for ambient effects like reverbs and delays, and for parallel compression, and for parallel EQ, and all of that fun stuff. Inserts. Inserts I use to affect a channel directly. So I have EQs and compressors on these buses, but I also have EQs over here on this horn section. I've just got them basically doing a high pass filter. So the audio is going, the trumpet is going through the microphone, in through my interface, and then into this channel here. And it's just going through this high pass filter, and then it's going to a horns bus. Where's the horns bus? The horns bus is here, where it's being EQ'd again in a bit more detail, and it's being compressed. And then a copy of it is being sent after the fader to the reverb. Okay, so the insert is affecting the channel directly. Whereas a send, you can send lots of different things to the same thing. So I have the backing vocals, the horns, and the soprano saxophone going in varying amounts to the same reverb, because I want all of those parts, those elements in my mix to sound as if they are in the same space. I don't have my keys going through that because my keys were printed with a reverb, so I don't need to do that. My bass and drums I don't tend to put reverb on bass and drums particularly. Certainly not for this song. For a ballad, I might put some reverb on the drums, but generally speaking, I don't. I tend to keep my drums and my bass pretty dry, to be honest. So I hope that helps you a wee bit. If you got any further questions on that, Epicurse, then please do feel free to email me or drop me a private message in Facebook, and we can deal with that a little bit further. Let's see, is there anything else? It doesn't look like there is. So we are going to wrap up there, folks. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can remember how to do that. There we go. There you go. You can see me again. Hello, folks. So we are gonna wrap it up there, folks. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's been a lot of fun explaining compression to you guys, and your questions are awesome as usual. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to you guys for allowing me to sit in for Jonny tonight. It's been good fun, and I am not entirely sure what Jonny is doing for the rest of the week. I believe the schedule has been posted up. Schedule has been posted up on the HST Studio One support group, and you'll see what Jonny is doing for the rest of the week. And then, as I say, on Sunday, I will do my regular Jonny Lipsham Studios live stream. I need to come up with a better title. I really do. So if you guys can think of a better title for me, message it to me. That'd be cool. Yeah, at the moment it's just called Jonny Lipsham Studios Live, which is a bit lame. So I'll be doing that on Sunday at 6 p.m. Central, and we will look at the FAT channel. I'd like to say a big thank you to Truckee Kruger for moderating for me and fishing out all the questions from all of the great conversation that's going on here. Really appreciate it. And on that point, I'm not going to say later because that's Johnny's thing to say. I'm going to say bye for now.